One of the striking things about the story you tell in the new report is the way in which Microsoft and other leading tech companies have worked closely with the U.S. government. I'll just quote something that you said in your April report on the war in Ukraine. Quote, we have kept the U.S. government advised of relevant information and have established communications with NATO and EU officials to communicate any evidence of threat, act or activity spreading beyond Ukraine. In other words, there really is a kind of government public company interaction here, cooperation, which would have been hard to imagine in the years immediately after the Snowden revelations in 2013 when tech companies really pulled back from the government. That era really is over. We are now in an era of greater willingness to cooperate with the government, including the intelligence community, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it's a good point, and I would qualify it a bit, David, because I think that there were lessons learned from the Snowden revelations that have been internalized and applied. They certainly have been internalized and applied at companies like Microsoft and Google and Meta and others. And I think, in my experience, they're internalized and applied at the government most days as well, which is we need to protect the privacy of individuals. We need to have clear rules and safeguards in place so that one government isn't trying to use its process to access the data that belongs to, say, another allied or democratic government. So I wouldn't want to leave anyone with the impression that suddenly all of those critical lessons have been cast aside. I think they're just as important in 2022 as they were, say, in 2013. But at the same time, the reality is that cyber is, as people say, the fourth plane of war. There's land, there's sea, there's air, now there's cyberspace. But cyberspace is, first of all, a human creation. It's not an element of nature. And it's a human creation that, by definition, is owned, it's operated, and it's protected in part by the private sector, in part by tech companies. And so we have a role that I will say is not only indispensable, it's unavoidable. You know, the first response of a business when a war breaks out is typically to leave the battle and get as far away as possible. And yet, if we're going to do what we strive to do in our mission as a company, which is to provide the infrastructure on which everyone relies, it needs to protect countries in times of war and in times of peace. And so, as we say in the report, in effect, this is not a war just between Russia and Ukraine. It is a war between Russia and Ukraine that involves an alliance of countries that are supporting Ukraine and an alliance of tech companies, and I would say NGOs. You know, the Cyber Peace Institute in Geneva last week issued another important report. And I think that is the present. That's probably, as far as I can see into the future, you know, what we'll have to really internalize as part of the rest of our lives and then fulfill this role very, very well.